For most of human history, power had a face. It wore a crown, sat on a throne, and ruled by divine right. When people were oppressed, they knew who did it. When taxes were raised, wars declared, or land seized, there was a king to blame. But today, power feels different. It's harder to see. There is no crown, no coronation, no single ruler to overthrow. And yet decisions that shape millions of lives are still made by a small group, often without elections, borders, or accountability. This raises a disturbing question. Did kings really lose power, or did power simply change its costume? The story we're told is comforting. Monarchies fell, democracies rose, power moved from bloodlines to ballots. But history is rarely that clean. When you trace where authority actually went, who gained control over resources, labor, and law, a different picture emerges. The fall of kings did not end concentrated power. It reorganized it. And the modern corporation became the most successful political invention of the post-monarchical world. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to a time when kings ruled not just nations, but economies. In medieval Europe, political authority and economic authority were fused. Kings granted land, monopolies, and charters. Guilds existed only by royal permission. Trade routes were protected by armies loyal to the crown. Wealth flowed upward, and legitimacy flowed downward. If you wanted to extract resources at scale, you needed royal approval. But this system had limits. Kings needed money to fight wars, administer territory, and maintain loyalty. Taxes were unreliable. Nobles resisted. Peasants revolted. So monarchs began outsourcing risk. They issued charters to private groups, giving them exclusive rights to trade, mine, colonize, or govern distant lands. In exchange, the crown received fees, loans, or a share of profits. This was the birth of the joint stock corporation. At first, these entities were tools of the king. The Dutch East India Company, the British East India Company, and similar ventures were extensions of royal power. They flew national flags, commanded private armies, and governed entire regions. But something subtle was happening. These corporations had a feature kings did not: continuity. A king could die, be overthrown, or go bankrupt. A corporation could outlive any individual. It could absorb losses, spread risk among shareholders, and operate across borders. As monarchies weakened under the pressure of wars, debt, and popular unrest, corporations quietly gained leverage. Kings borrowed heavily from merchants and financiers. In doing so, they tied political survival to economic creditors. By the 17th and 18th centuries, some crowns were effectively dependent on corporate-backed finance. The power dynamic was beginning to reverse. The decline of absolute monarchy accelerated with revolutions. The English Civil War, the Glorious Revolution, the American Revolution, and the French Revolution all challenged the idea that power should be inherited. They promised representation, rights, and limits on authority. But revolutions are expensive. New governments inherited old debts and needed new sources of revenue. Once again, corporations stepped in. This is where the story takes a turn most people miss. The fall of kings did not destroy the legal privileges they once granted. It transferred them. Corporate charters, once issued by monarchs, were now protected by constitutions and courts. Limited liability, perpetual existence, and contractual rights were preserved and expanded. Governments changed, but the economic machinery stayed intact. In the 19th century, industrialization transformed corporations from trading ventures into engines of production. Railroads, steel companies, oil trusts, and banks grew to unprecedented scale. They employed thousands, then millions. They controlled infrastructure nations depended on. Governments began to regulate them, but also relied on them for growth, employment, and tax revenue. This created a quiet dependency. The breaking point came when corporate power began to rival state power. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, monopolies and trusts dictated prices, wages, and supply chains. In some regions, they controlled housing, food, and transportation. Public outrage led to antitrust laws and labor reforms. It looked like democracy was pushing back, but the fix was incomplete. Corporations adapted faster than states. They learned to lobby, to shape regulation, to influence elections without holding office. Power no longer required a throne. It required access. The 20th century sealed the transformation. 2 world wars forced governments to partner closely with industry. Corporations built weapons, supplied logistics, and managed production. In return, they gained contracts, political influence, and legitimacy as national partners. After the wars, many of these corporations did not shrink. They expanded globally. At the same time, financial systems grew more complex. Central banking, stock markets, and multinational investment blurred the line between public and private authority. Economic decisions made in boardrooms began to affect currency stability, employment rates, and national security. Yet these decisions were not subject to popular vote. By the late 20th century, the modern corporate order was firmly in place. CEOs were not kings, but they commanded resources that rivaled entire countries. Some corporations generated more revenue than mid-sized nations. They could relocate factories, shift profits, and influence laws across borders. If a king once ruled by divine right, corporations ruled by market necessity. The fallout of this shift is everywhere. When a monarchy failed, it was visible. When a corporation fails, the consequences are diffuse. A financial collapse can erase pensions, homes, and jobs without a single villain to dethrone. Accountability becomes abstract. Responsibility is spread across systems, committees, and incentives. Governments have tried to fix this. Regulations, transparency laws, antitrust enforcement, and international agreements were designed to rein in corporate power. But these fixes often failed or were weakened. Corporations operate globally. Laws remain mostly national. Capital moves faster than legislation. Enforcement lags behind innovation. There is also a deeper issue. Corporations are legally obligated to prioritize profit. Kings sought power, legacy, and stability. Corporations seek growth. When profit becomes the primary organizing principle of society, decisions that affect health, environment, and democracy are filtered through financial logic. This doesn't require malice, it's systemic. The modern parallels are striking. In medieval times, kings controlled land and labor. Today, corporations control data, platforms, and supply chains. Where peasants once depended on royal protection, workers now depend on employers for health care, income, and security. Where kings extracted taxes, corporations extract rents through subscriptions, fees, and monopolies. The structure has changed, but the dependency remains. The data is sobering. A small percentage of corporations account for a majority of global emissions. A handful of technology firms control the flow of information for billions of people. Financial institutions deemed too big to fail receive state support when they collapse, while individuals do not. This mirrors the old logic of monarchy. Some entities are indispensable, others are expendable. History also shows repeating patterns. Concentrated power leads to inequality. Inequality leads to unrest. Unrest leads to reform or collapse. In the past, this cycle played out around kings and nobles. Today it plays out around corporations and markets. The names have changed, but the dynamics have not. So what does this mean? First, it means that political change without economic change is incomplete. Removing a crown does not dismantle power structures if the underlying control of resources remains concentrated. Second, it means accountability has shifted from visible rulers to opaque systems. This makes resistance harder, not easier. And third, it means the future will be shaped not by whether corporations exist, but by who controls them and under what rules. The warning is not that corporations are evil, but that unchecked power, in any form, tends to drift away from public interest. Kings learned this the hard way. Corporations are learning it now. The question is whether societies will respond before the cycle repeats itself again. If power has replaced kings with contracts, crowns with corporate logos, and thrones with boardrooms, then democracy's challenge is not finished. It has only changed arenas. Understanding that shift is the first step. Ignoring it ensures history keeps repeating. If this story changed how you see power, share it, question it, and keep digging. Because the most dangerous authority is the kind that no longer looks like authority at all.